Yes, is it not? That I'm not the one. I'm not the one who does it. You must speak to Cadre about that. I have nothing to do with that. That's from the media office.
Good afternoon. If you've joined the webinar, we just, as we would for a physical event, we're just waiting for people to settle down into their chairs. If you're cooking at home, to finish chopping those onions for whatever amazing dinner you're cooking for your family. We're going to have an amazing early evening here in South Africa. I think it's very early in the morning in the US. That's important context because you'll find out why once we start getting into the conversation. We'll give it another 3 minutes or so, and then we'll start the conversation. Thank you for your patience. Good afternoon and welcome to this very special event hosted by UWC, the University of the Western Cape, our sports part of our really awesome university, in partnership with a long-standing friend of the university. I think this relationship goes back more than 30 years, and that's the University of Missouri, and we will explain the dynamic there. So we've got a co-host who, it's actually morning time for them. And as you know, these events, you can see people walking behind me and walking in front of me. This is our new life, you know, as part of COVID. So welcome everybody. We're going to get into a really courageous, what I call a courageous conversation today, because we've got some very special an illustrious and special panel that's going to dissect this issue. And, you know, we find ourselves in South Africa at a time when more than 25 years after democracy, we're still talking about racism, allegations of racism in some of our sporting codes. We're talking about sports bodies who aren't coming to the party for athletes. And we're still lamenting the role that administrators play in our sports bodies. And then we talk about South Africa and the role it should be playing in the Black Lives Matter movement. And we saw recently how some of our sports teams were very ambiguous about their support for Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement, but also how playing against teams like the West Indies, who have spearheaded the Black Lives movement in sport, and South Africa being very ambiguous. Now, I want to park that and then bring in something that's worried me personally as a male South African, that from April to June 2021, when we were at lockdown level 4, there were 30,000 reported rapes. That's a period of just 3 months. That's an average of 111 rape cases a day. And in any society, that is completely unacceptable. So there are reasons why I'm bringing up these issues, because today we're going to focus about women in sport. So if we're talking about Black athletes in sport, there are Black men in sport who have just slightly more privilege than a whole other subcategory where there's almost no privilege. It is the neglected segment of our sports society, and that's Black women in sport in South Africa. And so let me get straight into this illustrious panel. Today we're talking to Miss Lydia Muniepao. She has been the Chief Operating Officer for the South African Football Association since July 2021. She's also Deputy Director for TIC Sport at the University of Pretoria. She has over 15 years of experience in the financial and sport management industries, and she completed a Master's in Sport Management at Louwbrugh University. I hope I pronounced that correctly, ma'am. She holds a BCom and a BCom honors in accounting, but she's also worked for the 2010 FIFA World Cup local organizing committee with a few friends of mine like Jermaine Craig, after which she served as the team ops manager for the SA women's football team at the 2012 London Olympics, the African Women's Championships also in 2012, and the Cyprus Women's Cup in 2012 and 2013. Lydia has 20 international caps for Banyana Banyana, with 4 goals scored during a period of 2002 and 2004. She represented South Africa in the FISU World Student Games in 1999 in basketball, and in 2001 and 2003 in football. So she's walked the talk. We've got a very talented individual there. Moving along, I'd like to introduce you to Ms. Nomsa Mahlangu from the University of Johannesburg's. She's the Senior Director of Sport there. She's also the first woman to have served as president of the Federation of Africa's University Sports. She's also been the president of University Sports South Africa since 2019, and she served as a board member of the 2010 FIFA World Cup, AFCON 2013, and also the CHAN tournament, which is the kind of forerunner to the AFCON Cup, or the Cup of African Nations. She's served as a SAFA NEC member and the chairperson of the African Women's Championship in 2010, among other roles. Prior to joining the University of Johannesburg, she was previously the head of the Department of Sport Administration at the Durban University of Technology and sports manager at the University of the Free State. She holds a BA Honours degree in Human Movement Science and a degree in Bachelor of Leisure Sciences, Event and Facility Management from the University of the Free State. In 2009, Ms. Mahlangu was the first woman to be elected into the South African Football Association Executive Committee. So we've got a trailblazer, ladies and gentlemen, as part of our panel. Excuse me. Our next panelist is Ms. Yoliswa Lumka, and she's the Director of Sport at Nelson Mandela University, commonly known as the Madibas. I think Brayton Paulson might have coined that nickname. She's been a basketball coach for the last 9 years, as well as a team manager for the wheelchair basketball women's national teams in 2011. Yoliswa took up the role of Director High Performance at Wheelchair Basketball South Africa and fulfilled this role until 2016. She's worked with a number of PSL and First Division teams, soccer teams, looking after the players' health interests. During 2008 and 2015, Ms. Lumka was involved in the country's high-performance system through her work at the Sport and Recreation South Africa, in the Scientific Support Services Directorate, in a capacity as head of sport performance at Stellenbosch University, and as manager academy systems and team preparation at the South African Sport Confederation and Olympic Committee, which is commonly known as SASCOC. She also serves on several boards, including the Anti-Doping Tribunal and the South African Institute for Drug-Free Sport, as I mentioned, SASCOC's Technical, Scientific and Research Commission, and Varsity Sport. And then our very special friend from the United States, who is so generously sharing his work with us, and which will be the focus of our discussion today, is Dr. Ty Douglas. Now, I'm going to get back to Dr. Douglas a bit later, but before I do that, I want to give you, the viewer of this webinar, a little bit of a taste of what we're talking about here. Now, we created this trailer, and the trailer is about a 3-part documentary series that focuses on Dr. Douglas's time at UWC, where he met, quite fortuitously, a set of twin sisters and their partners, and found this amazing story about them and their battle for recognition to reach their Olympic dream. They were students of UWC. He was visiting the Western Cape and South Africa at the time, and he was working with different sports people at the university. He also immersed himself in the very famous suburb of Mitchell's Plain, where I also spent my formative years growing up. And he found an incredible story here that led him down 3 avenues, which we'll discuss later. The first is the barriers to entry for sports women in South Africa. The second one, the different levels of, let me call it, blackness in South Africa, and the whole black diaspora conversation in South Africa, which includes, especially here in the Western Cape, the label that was foisted onto people who look like me, and that's the colored group. Now, Dr. Douglas will tell you that that's an entirely different concept in the USA. It's actually a derogatory term in societies in the United States. And the third part, which I think is very poignant and which I alluded to in the introduction, focused on gender-based violence and how sport can actually be an intervention into breaking down the very high rates of gender-based violence in South Africa. So without further ado, I want to show the audience a little teaser of the documentary. We don't have enough time to show the full documentary, but we're going to show you a little trailer, and it will pique your interest just enough so that you can watch it after this exciting event.
The athlete twins.
Athlete twins, yeah, we're always known as the fast twins.
Former white institutions would take our top black athletes.
Women played a fundamental role in changing the jurisprudence of this country, changing the legal framework of this country. They want a unit to particularly look at women's issues and concerns.
This kid was telling me, top athlete, that the reason why he became ill was he didn't have food. Volleyball South Africa is a mess. That's why I left the organization, and nothing has changed. We have no national teams that compete, even in the continent.
Our society is raising very angry young men.
An 18-year-old that was raped, stabbed 18 times and then set to light. It was just after all these protests and things, that's not the only incident. After that, it's ongoing.
You stand on the field and you promote fair play, you promote respect, you promote excellence, which means to be the best that you can be. Not the best in itself and the gold medal, but the best that you can be. So these are the Olympic values. How can you be a sports person, male or female, on the field, promoting those values, or even as a coach? So we have an issue with values.
And there you have it, folks, Border Crossing Sisters. It is a bit of follow-up work by Dr. Douglas, whose work on Border Crossing Brothers was a published work, and he felt he needed to take the journey even further to that almost subcategory of our sporting society, which is Black women in sport, but in particular, Black women in sport in South Africa. And he uses the device of the twin sisters, Tamlin and Tamsin Thomas, to tell the story in a very engaging way. It's very compelling viewing, and it's very nice to see somebody who's immersed in multimedia, who can write books, who can direct documentaries, and stand in front of a camera and tell a compelling story, you know. So Dr. Douglas, just a little bit about him. He has a PhD from the inaugural Associate Athletic Director as the inaugural Associate Athletic Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Belonging at the University of California, Berkeley. He's also a tenured Associate Professor of Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis at the University of Missouri. Dr. Douglas is the author or editor of 5 books and over 40 journal articles or book chapters. He has offered guest commentary for major international networks like Fox News and Sports Illustrated, and served as a consultant or keynote speaker for numerous universities and organizations such as the NCAA, the NFL, and the National Basketball Players Association. Dr. Douglas earned a PhD in Curriculum and Teaching, Cultural Studies, and 2 master's degrees. He's also completed the Athlete Development Executive Education Certification at the University of Pennsylvania. Notably, he's a friend of South Africa and UWC, where he spent a lot of time. He's climbed Lion's Head, Table Mountain, and Devil's Peak. I can honestly say I've lived here for 43 years, and I haven't done that. So Dr. Douglas, the floor is yours. Please, you are the keynote speaker. Please tell us about your journey and why you felt compelled to tell the story.
Well, first, thank you. I almost said good morning, but I should say good evening, South Africa. Good evening, Cape Town. And thank you for the warm introduction, Mr. Abada. I just want to say, you know, it's an honor and a privilege to be here today. to be with you all the way from, I work in Berkeley, California, but I live in the Walnut Creek area in the Bay Area. So for those of you who are familiar with the geography of the United States, I live near where the Golden State Warriors play. So Steph Curry is not too far away, apparently. He lives in the same city as me. But we're close to, if you look up San Francisco or Oakland, and Berkeley, California is nested in that area. And it's been I've been humbled and honored to be here since January 1st, officially, as you mentioned in my bio, as the Associate Athletic Director for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at the University of California, Berkeley, otherwise known in some spaces, obviously, as Cal, or Cal Athletics. And so it's been an interesting journey for me, formally, and I'm actually still, connected and a tenured associate faculty member, professor at the University of Missouri, where this work was produced and actually where it was funded. So I want to just, in addition to acknowledging my dear colleagues and friends in Cape Town, in South Africa, in Johannesburg, where we also filmed some of the footage, I want to say thank you to you all, but I also want to say thank you to the University of Missouri. And I won't call a lot of names today because there were so many people. When you work on a documentary and you cross borders and you engage in this type of work, there were so many people who are helpful in your process. But I do want to make sure that I can acknowledge Dr. Rod Uphoff. This UWC, University of Missouri partnership is one that I benefited from multiple times. I first came to Cape Town in 2017, and it was a study, as you mentioned, to extend my work that I had done in Bermuda, where I'm originally from. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a second. But also I did a similar study of our Black male student athletes at the University of Missouri. And so I was grateful for the support of Dr. Uphoff and our UWC partnership that allowed me to go to Cape Town and to do some work looking at the experiences of Black male athletes in Cape Town, and in particular at UWC. It was during that time, again, that Dr. Uphoff was really helpful, so I want to thank him and his team. But also I got to meet individuals like your wonderful sport director, Mr. Manla Gangagi. I just want to say, again, thank you for your support, and every person on your team. There have been so many people who were kind. I consider myself, if you don't mind, a son of South Africa. Is that all right? I hope that I mentioned that I had climbed 3 peaks in 3 weeks, that I had touched Lion's Head. That was Lion's Head, Devil's Peak, and Table Mountain 3 weeks in a row. This wasn't just spread out. I knocked them all out, in part because I value space and I value people. And so I want you to know how much I value each of you who are watching, and to every person that participated in the documentary, from our experts on the campus of UWC, brilliant scholars, colleagues. I have great respect for you. And I hope that as you watch the documentary after the session today, you'll see all the names, you'll see the faces, you'll hear voices that you know. And I hope that it does justice to a conversation that, frankly, I am honored to be a part of and that I am contributing to. But as a person who does not live in South Africa, who does not live in Cape Town, who is not, I was not born and raised in Cape Town, and as someone who studies space, I want to be very respectful and very intentional to ensure that this conversation is actually meant to center the voices of the people of Cape Town, of the people of South Africa, which is why the panel is configured in the way that it is. I would also thank those who helped from a technical standpoint. You may or may not see some of their names, but you know who you are. Thank you so much. Again, I won't call names because you always leave people out, but I hope that this initial just thank you is sufficient to acknowledge the university and partnerships that helped to make this happen. Our footage also, in addition to being captured at UWC or taken at UWC, we also visited Stellenbosch University. So I want to thank my colleagues who were in that space as well. And community partners. We visited other schools, and I got a chance to speak to various individuals all across the Cape Town area. And so I really do feel a part of the family. I should also mention I have a great colleague and friend who's done some work with an organization, a nonprofit called Next Level Living. And I want to acknowledge them as well. There was a partnership that helped us in that regard. And then in particular, I do want to make sure that we acknowledge and mention and say thank you to and lift up and celebrate Tamsin and Tamlin Thomas and their family. I certainly will call their names. I want to make sure that we can say their names. These are two amazing women that I greatly respect. and have had the opportunity to get to know. I'm really, really, really excited about their journey. And this process, this documentary, this conversation is more than about really, telling a story. For me, it's an extension of my commitment to advocacy and activism. And so I want to, as much as I can, continue to support their dreams in any way that I can as a colleague, as a mentor. And so I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to meet them and to work with them. And of course, their partners whom you meet in the documentary as well. And in particular, I should mention, that one of the first people that I did meet was also Andre B., a former student athlete at UWC, who was running around the track there on a Sunday morning all by himself. And we began to record on a phone, just sort of like these little commercials, right? And the commercials led to conversations. And I was just, we if it was up to me, we wanted to do something for Nike, for Cape Town Athletics, or for the national team, for an Olympic commercial. And then during that conversation, or soon thereafter, Tamzin actually came up and said, "Hey, Dr. Ty, I hear you're doing all this work, with Black males, but what about our sisters, right? Would you be willing to record, something of me?" And we did this cool little tagline, and we recorded different little commercials that I hope one day we can produce in another setting. But it really stirred my heart because, for me, if you know anything about my story, you know that I am an advocate for my sisters. Long before the PhD, long before, the administrative position here at the University of California, Berkeley, or as a professor at the University of Missouri, I was the embryo inside of a 19-year-old college freshman, a woman who was very athletic herself. And I wish if I had the time, I would bring up a picture of her where you'll see my mom with her muscles, right? And she is strong still, but she is a powerful woman and a woman with a powerful story. And I want to acknowledge the women in my life who have made a big difference. And in particular, my mother, who, at 19 years old, she chose, to lean into me and to develop me, help to develop me into the man that I am. And as a result of that, my grandmother, my aunts, and of course, my dad, who's a sport administrator, I've had a balance of amazing men and amazing women in my life, including my wife, who I want to acknowledge. But I say that to say that sometimes when we have these conversations about identity, about family, about advocacy, about leadership, or in my work, I call it freedomship, unfortunately, the conversations often get siloed where there are disconnects between our advocacy for, let's say, men, but then we don't talk about, or we don't use our energy, as young people say, we don't keep that same energy when it comes to advocating for women, right? We talk about race, we talk about Black Lives Matter. And if you know my story, you know my work, I'm committed to the uplift of Black people and all people. But I'm concerned that at times our advocacy as relates to women wanes. And so I hope that this conversation, as I often use in my office here at Cal, will help to accelerate the work for women and the work for women across the diaspora. So if I'm honest with you, this is not a date. We're in a relationship. I hope Cape Town, hopefully we can utilize the chat as well. I'm a teacher first, so please talk to me in the chat. I know you've had a long day. It's early in the morning here, and I'm going to give you my best energy. So feel free to talk to us in the chat, but know you are joining a conversation. This is not the last conversation. This is just the beginning. I would love to have a future conversation where we bring in now women scholars and leaders from across the world who are also joining and talking with you about the documentary. So we're going to continue to dialogue together. So again, one key takeaway for me, I want us as a community to commit to ensuring that we, as we say, keep that same energy. Type that in the chat, somebody. Let's keep the same passion that we have when we celebrate, what is it, the Springboks? The men's team, right? Did I say that right? I haven't been in Cape Town before. Did I say that right?
The world champion Springboks.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Somebody said 100%, right? So I know when my people, like the people of South Africa, you love sport. Many of you, like me, you're Liverpool fans. You binge watch sport. I've been in around your environment, your pubs. I've been in your space. I've spent time in Mitchell's Plain. I visited your schools, and I know that you love sport and you're passionate about it. I would like for us to commit from this conversation to keep that same energy as relates to how we advocate for women in sport, how we challenge gender-based violence, how we ensure that there is access and our students and our student athletes and our athletes are supported so that they can have what they need to thrive. I'm almost done. I want to transition to a larger conversation beyond me, but I do want to just give you a couple of thoughts that came to me as I reflected on my journey, on my time in Cape Town, in my time creating the documentary. And I want to also acknowledge those, my production team, I should mention them as well for sure. You know, Mizzou students who flew with me, it was a smaller team, and as well as my production team on this side. Somebody said citizenship in South Africa. Let's make it happen. I can't wait to visit again. But you know, what an amazing time in our world, right? I mean, I came in 2017. I think about the 2015, 2016 student uprisings that took place in Cape Town. When you think about the Roads Must Fall movement, when you think about fees must fall, you all were connected to a larger movement of activism that was also happening across the globe, right? You should know that in 2014, 2015, at the University of Missouri, the study that I conducted there was actually around the same time that we had an uprising on our campus. And I think this is important to note because sometimes when we are in our different countries around the world, we don't recognize that we are part of a larger movement. And I feel like you all were part of that choo-choo train that even helped to, that really exploded in 2020 in the United States. You know, the uprisings in South Africa are not disconnected from the uprisings in the United States and the uprisings that have happened in other parts of the diaspora. So thank you for being a part of the movement. And when I came in 2017, I could feel the tension. You know, I didn't subscribe to, and I know Mr. Mandela also challenges the language of men are trash, because I heard that prominently when I was there. And as someone, as an advocate for man, I don't think that we have to tear down one to lift up another, but I understand what I believe the sisters were communicating. That was the pain of the reality that many men and patriarchy has done great disservice and continues to be an infringement upon the identities, opportunities, and access of women. So I heard that pain. I visited the barbershops, I visited the hair salons and the soccer spaces. I sat down not just with man, but as I listened to the heart of the people, I heard the pain. And so I want to make sure I can acknowledge that. And that's what really brought me to this moment, right? When I came back to the United States, of course, you know, there's been a crescendoing that I think we've seen the fruit of in 2020. And now with COVID-19 and all that's happened in our world, there's been this opportunity for conversations to be unified across the diaspora. Zoom has allowed us to be in a lot of places. Would you agree? Have you been, anybody else been all over the world via Zoom, right? And I believe this is a special moment. It feels sort of Wakanda-like, you know what I mean? I feel like it's a little Wakanda forever that's happening where conversations, yeah, Wakanda forever. Conversations are happening all across the world where people are beginning to realize, hey, you may look a little differently from me or have a little different accent, but some of our struggles are the same. Some of the structures that we see are the same. You may say sure, right? Don't you all say sure? But over here we may say, you know, another word, but suggesting the same passion that says, whew, what's happening here? What are we seeing? What are the connections? What are the dots that need to be brought together? And so in this conversation today, I want to help to bring together a larger diaspora conversation that has begun, and that I believe this documentary will help to further. I want to highlight the fact that in my research, one of the things that I found in my studies is that when we think about how people form identities, there are 4 particular variables. One is expectations. You might want to type that in the chat, positive or negative. All right, the expectations that you have for people. What I love about Tamsin and Tamlin's mother and dad, and I also want to acknowledge their sister and their nephew, but their parents, you know, they had high expectations for them. And I want to give a shout out to Mitchell's Plain, right? I mean, sometimes folks have particular areas that we come from, but then the expectations for who we are based on where we come from may be lower. Their parents didn't lower their expectations. There was an expectations that these women would excel, that they would exceed. And I want to encourage those who are watching, student athletes, whatever university you're from, parents, administrators, staff, coaches, scholars, that we need to raise the level of our expectations, that the world wants to hear from South Africa, that the world wants to hear from Cape Town. And the passion that you hear from me comes from my beginnings as well. I don't just do research, I want to invite you through this documentary to do what I call me search. To look at yourself. I need some men to ask some questions about you, about how you think about women, about the objectification of our sisters. Like, do you see her as a sex symbol? Do you see her as someone to be conquered? Do you see her as someone less than yourself? If you do, that's a problem that we need a challenge. We need to do some me search, like the beginnings. Where did you start? I started inside of the room of a 19-year-old college freshman, my mother, and she nearly had an abortion of me because of structures, a church structure that she knew would reject her because she was pregnant and not married. And she made a decision to keep me because she felt me move inside of her room while she was at the abortion clinic. So when you hear me talk about passion, when you feel my passion, it comes from a very real place of identity and the reality that I believe I was called to help sisters and brothers move at the right time. This movement stuff didn't just start in 2020 for me. And I'm excited to share. It will be important to acknowledge that when we talk about systems and structures, we'll also talk about how we build our family. So as you listen to me, I want you to think about your family and not just do me search, but I need you to also do what I call research. Research is what the scholars say. Me search is about what I say, what I hear, what I know, what I've experienced. But research says, what's our story? What's the story of my family? What's the story of UWC? What's the story of Cape Town? What's the Olympic story for 2020, 2021 as relates to the University of Cape Town, South Africa, or the country more generally? Like, what's the story? What's the research story? And when you begin to do that research, you begin to make some connections that allow you to change systems. My mom is no longer a 19-year-old college freshman. I want to share this with you as encouragement. She's now a dissertation away from being the next Dr. Douglas in my family. Listen to me. I'm talking about what happens when you do me search. I'm talking about what happens when you keep that same energy. Because for me, it was never sufficient to go off to college and get my degree when my mom chose me over her nursing degree. My life's commitment is to ensure that I pull back in, that I make and leave people, places, and things better than I find them. So again, I want to say this. This documentary is not about money, or we haven't made anything off. This is not about exploiting folks or just taking the South Africa story and sharing it. I want to know, how do we build together? How do we take this movement and ensure that others get access? And how do we use our influence to change systems? My mom will finish her dissertation soon. My sister just started her doctorate at the University of Georgia. What am I saying to you? I'm saying that when we have access, we have a responsibility to share it. And when we have expectations, it's important that they're high. I will close with this. My work also highlights the reality that in our experiences and experimentation is important. You know, the opportunity to positively experiment, right? The opportunity to have positive exposure, to be exposed to the best of who we can be. And also the power of expression, of hearing and seeing yourself and others being able to hear your messages in contextual ways. And so I share that with great humility. I won't go in a whole lot further to talk about some of the other pieces of my work, but I will say that I believe it's time that we now think about what does it mean to also educate. I gave you 4 E's as relates to the forming of identities, but what does it look like to help our young people and our families to flourish through education, through the environments that we're in, through economic empowerment, which is a biggie all across the world, and I know in South Africa is huge, and through the capacity to emigrate, to help folks to board across. What does it look like for you who are listening, student athletes who have Olympic dreams, to have what you need for the 2024 Olympics? That's what this documentary is about. That's what this conversation is about. It's about ensuring that we change systems. It's about ensuring that we think about the spaces that we're in. I want to close by letting you know that when I produced this documentary, I was about 125 miles from St. Louis. Columbia, Missouri is a city in the state of Missouri. If you know the geography, Missouri is in the middle of the United States, if you will. Some folks call it, the Midwest. And so for me, moving from one space to another, from the Midwest to California is very different. Much like living in Durban is different from, living in Joburg, which is different from living in Cape Town. Every area has its cultural nuances. But it wasn't lost on me that I was sitting 125 miles from where Michael Brown was shot and killed by Darren Wilson. It wasn't lost on me that I was 125 miles from the location of the 1904 Olympic Games. And when I began to do my research, come on, talk to me somebody. When I began to do my research and think about my me-search and my research, I was sensitive to the reality that the very first time that South African athletes participated in an Olympic Games in 1904, it was actually in St. Louis on the campus, I believe, of Washington University. Can you imagine that? And my research also shared that there were 3 participants from South Africa, and 2 of them were Black, all participating in the marathon, finishing 9th and 12th respectively. And I want to highlight that there was one gentleman by the name of Len Tayani, and I want you to look him up for yourself. This is about education. In my office at UC Berkeley, in my work at Missouri, at the University of Missouri, I seek to educate, to celebrate, and to accelerate our efforts. So I hope that somebody, a young person, an administrator, will go and Google this right now. Look it up for yourself. I want to make sure we give credit to Wikipedia, where I'm reading from. So it's not even like a source that you have to go very far. Look it up for yourself. But you should know that at the 1904 marathon, they say it was an informal affair. I'm reading, I want to give credit to the source. But they say that it was run on an unsuitable course over roads so dusty that it caused many athletes to collapse. And I'm reading directly word for word. Tanyani entered the race at the last minute as a Zulu, and therefore did not formally represent South Africa that existed only in 1910 as the Union of South Africa. But what we should know is that he literally ran barefoot and finished 9th place out of 32 in the field and 14 finishers. They say they were disappointed by the result, but many observers were sure he would have done better, listen to me, if he had not been chased nearly a mile off course by aggressive dogs. And it wouldn't surprise me if those weren't stray dogs, but perhaps dogs that were earned or encouraged by individuals who have never been excited about our Black skin, about Black identity. And so when we think about our people and the uplift and the struggle about having to run barefoot, he was actually there for the 1904 World's Fair. There was no celebration for him being this great Olympian. But now in 2021, we have the opportunity to write books and to create documentaries that challenge the notion that only Black men matter. No, Black women matter, and athletes matter, and South Africa matters. And so I hope that as you go and watch the documentary, as you engage this conversation, you're encouraged to know that we're living at a very special time, a time when I believe in the midst of darkness, there is great hope. In the midst of darkness, there is great light. And I believe that in addition to the success of men in South Africa in the Olympics, we need to acknowledge also Barbara Nash, who was the first South African woman to participate in the Olympics in 1920. And so again, there's a great legacy, there's a great history, and I believe there's an exciting present that I believe the documentary Border Crossing Sistas will allow us to do. And I'll be remiss in closing if I did not note that this year at the Olympics, my island of Bermuda, my country of Bermuda, we had our very first Olympic gold medal in the form of Flora Duffy, who won in the triathlon. She actually went to my same high school. And so I know that great things can start small. I saw Flora's face when she came out of that water and she jumped on that bike. I saw her when she began to run. I could see that there was a determination that said, this is the day, this is the time. I'm gonna keep that same energy. I'm not gonna give up, I'm gonna push. And I knew that it was over for those competitors because there was something in her that said, now is the time. South Africa, Cape Town, my dear colleagues, University of Western Cape, University of Missouri, UC Berkeley, Cal Athletics, my colleagues who participated in this documentary, Temlin, Thomas family, now is the time. Now is the time for us to use our voices and to change the world, challenging injustice in all its forms. That includes white supremacy, but it also includes sexism. It also includes homophobia and anything else that hinders our human family from having absolute access to be the best that they can be. So thank you again for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this. I look forward to getting your feedback on the documentary, and I look forward to our conversation as we proceed.
Thank you, Dr. Douglas. I just have a question, like, what do you have for breakfast? Because I want to replicate your energy every day of the week. Thank you for a very stirring keynote address there. The problem with these virtual events is that we can't applaud. But I can tell you, I want to applaud you for an amazing keynote address.
Mr. Abada, can you do me a favor with that? Can folks just type in the chat for me if they felt anything that I said? Can they just type sure? What does that look like? I don't know what sure looks like in writing, but I know when we say sure, right? We felt that. So sure, South Africa. God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Tai. I want to just acknowledge a few people because it was remiss of me not to, but after I did the introduction, I saw who was in the room. And so the twins are here, the Thomas twins, who are a seminal feature of the documentary. And I think what struck me about the two of them were their partners, because often we leave the burden on women to explain why they hurt, why they're feeling pain, when men are the protagonists. You know, men kind of make the rules when it comes to Caster Semenya about women, what women can wear at Wimbledon. When it comes to Serena Williams, you know, it's old white men who make the rules. I also want to acknowledge, Ms. Elam Groenewald, who was the former director of sports at UWC and is now at Stellenbosch University, but also the first women's board member at the South African Rugby Union, which is a phenomenal achievement. Like with our panelists, you know, trailblazers. I have to mention Mr. Muniepao, who is, if you can't mention Rodney Apple from University of Missouri without mentioning Umesh, they are twins. In fact, when you see Umesh, you see Rodney in the same room, always. I also want to thank Mr. Gagai, our Director of Sports, for his immense energy, for throwing his weight behind women in sport and speaking always very passionately, not only speaking, but acting through his actions, supporting women in sport. And then one of our top women administrators who also features in the documentary, Ms. Almen Klute. I want to pay a tribute to her. She was a South African volleyball player and also a top administrator of women's football at UWC. So I want to start off by going to the Ms. Mahlangu from the University of Johannesburg. So Dr. Tai, this symbol can also mean Orlando Pirates, which was one of our famous football clubs. And obviously, I'm a fan, as you can hear. One of our famous football clubs who gave people hope during very dark days in South Africa, you know, in a suburb called Soweto, one of two great football clubs who gave Black people a little bit of hope in great times of despair. So, Ms. Mahlangu, I want to speak to you about, you know, it's no accident that we are all university people. You know, we're located at universities. And when I look at the US college system, right? And you look at women's football, there are 450,000 registered women's footballers in the United States. So is it an accident that they've won the most recent FIFA Women's World Cup? I don't think it is. Then you come to the Western Cape, right? And I have an 8-year-old daughter who's a keen footballer, but there's no league in Cape Town to accommodate my 8-year-old daughter. Yet we're playing AFCON. We've got Ntembi Kgatlana, a former African women's footballer of the year who also studied at UWC, but is with Atletico Madrid now. So does the universities create the natural home for women athletes to thrive? Because in the documentary, which you'll watch later, people like Elam Groenewald, people like Almen Klute talk about the fight with the establishment. You know, your organizations that are supposed to be the administrators of sport in South Africa, but pay lip service to the advancement of women's sport. So, Ms. Mahlangu, give us your take as a woman director of sport at a preeminent university in South Africa.
Well, thank you. I'm still trying to process Dr. Douglas's speech because it brought up a lot of emotions from me. And I think getting to your question, universities are areas of knowledge. And universities for me are supposed to be change agents as opposed to only being academic institutions. But before I answer your question, I want to quickly speak of the 5 Ps for me. We all live in a planet. We are people. We want partnerships. We want to prosper. And most importantly, we want peace. Now, universities are placed within communities. Universities themselves are communities. And what is our responsibility as universities towards the communities? And obviously today, the discussion is about sport. When you look at the Olympic team from South Africa that went to the Olympics recently, and even the Paralympics right now, most of those athletes, administrators, and coaches come from the university infrastructure. That means that there needs to be stronger collaborations between the federations in South Africa and the universities. And what is missing in the South African development pipeline is school sport. We need to ensure that we develop a sustainable school sport structure that will link up directly to universities, as opposed to a situation where an institution like UJ will get terms in from UWC. UJ must ensure that as an institution, they are linked with a number of schools so that those kids, when they get to matric, they then directly come to different universities. And again, as South African universities, we also need to start looking at what am I good at? I've had these conversations with my colleagues before. We all know that most of the sprinters come from tags. Then as South Africa, it means we must take all our sprinters to tags. And we know that women's football is much stronger in both TUT and UWC. Then it would mean we need to place our athletes there. But when you talk about sport in the country, sport will only prosper if federations embrace the role of universities. And also, universities need to play a greater role in developing community sports within the communities where we exist, because we have a responsibility towards those communities. And when you look at our teams, we've had a conversations with a few colleagues that as South Africans, we seem not to be that strong mentally. What is the role of the university to ensure that they raise the bar in terms of mental well-being of our athletes? And answering your question again, as universities, we then need to ensure that where we are, at least we run 1 or 2 schools leagues so that we can ensure that your daughter has a place where they can play football. And maybe UWC must look at having a junior football club, the football team that will feed into their senior team so that you don't have to struggle to look for that team.
Looks like he may have been frozen. That was a powerful comment. Can you hear me, Ms. Namza?
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome. while we're waiting for our moderator to come back, I just want to just affirm what you shared. Yeah, thank you. You gave us 5 P's. I wrote them down. I got 4 of them. You said planet, people, prosper,
peace,
people,
partnership.
I'm sorry, partnership. And what was the other one?
Planet, people, peace, partnership, prosper.
Love it. Love it. That's good. That's powerful.
That's very powerful. Thanks.
Yeah,
sorry,
absolutely.
I just blinked there for a second. my Wi-Fi connection. But to be honest with you, my love for football. So as you, with your Olympic gold medalist, Dr. Tai, I fell in love with football growing up in an area called Salt River. And I attended a school called Dryden Street Primary and Salt River High School, where both these schools I attended was also attended by a woman called Desiree Ellis, who is now the current national coach of the South African women's football team known as Banyana. And she also is probably the most decorated footballer in the history of the women's game in South Africa. So, I mean, a woman in football inspired me, not Lionel Messi or Diego Maradona, to start kicking a football around. But then I want to come to another of our panelists here, and Lydia, I want to ask you, what kind of barriers to entry? Because the first part of Dr. Tai's documentary talks about those barriers to entry. I'm thinking about sport, across the codes. And perhaps there's somebody from Khayelitsha who's an incredible golfer, but we'll never know because she doesn't have the resources to go to a golf course or have a set of golf clubs. Look at Babalwa Latsha from UWC, who's the captain of the Springbok women's team. And when she came to UWC, she had no idea about rugby, and now is the first professional rugby player in South Africa, So can I ask you about those barriers to entry? And coupled to that, I also want to ask you about the disparity between male athletes, whether they're black or white, and women's athletes in terms of the commercialization of sport and salaries. There's inequalities because women athletes have to hold down a second job in most instances,
Yeah. Thank you. Firstly, I would like to greet everyone in this platform. And sure, Dr. Tai, what a powerful, energizing, speech he gave at the beginning. I was feeling like, at the end of the day, you feel so tired after running around the whole day, but that kind of charged me. You were like my Red Bull. You gave me wings. I feel more energized now and more inspired. Thank you for that. Coming back to your question, the first one about barriers to entry. I think firstly, I would speak possibly from an African woman's perspective, based on my personal experience. The first thing it would be, where one comes from, your background, your culture. That could be, most often than not, I've seen in football, it starts as a barrier because it's what your parents, the people around your community believe in. Where I came from, it was believed that women don't play football. It's the men that play football. Women play netball. It's a primary school I went to. They catered for the men, they catered football. The women, they catered netball. And then it was athletics where we kind of combined. But everything else, there was always the separation between men that do this, women do this. I think it's a society where we come from. And obviously over the years, those things have kind of changed. I mean, even the high school I went to, I remember registering for under 13, football program. I had all sorts of choices, to make, but I went for football because I was really interested after I saw Banyana playing. And I was like, hey, that's a sport that I would really like to get into. And they just got there, scratched my name and say, hey, go play hockey, go play netball, go play something else. Yeah, it's only boys. So, it was only when I got to the university, to Wits University, that, I found women's football thriving. There was an organized res league. Every Wednesday night, the women got together and they played against each other. And I discovered back then we called them SASU, now it's USA, where Ms. Nonsa Mahlangu is the president. I discovered those competitions, organized competition. That's what I discovered. And I realized that, football is not only about, the boys, also the girls. I mean, I grew up where my father, always, he was a Stan Kaiser Chiefs supporter, and he wanted, if anything, he wanted one of my brothers to play football, but my brothers were not there. And I ended up being the one actually at home playing football, actually going all the way on an international level. It took a lot of convincing for me to do that. I mean, I came from a community where girls didn't wear shorts, we didn't wear pants, we only wore dresses. But to convince my mother to buy a short for me, it was something else. And eventually boots, those kind of things, it's something that, took some time, but I'm glad that those perceptions are slowly but surely changing, because we see women's football and more women's sport on television, because those are the kind of things, when we see women participating in sport, more, it encourages people to normalize women taking part in sport and not say it's only for the men. And the second thing I'll talk about is affordability. Affordability hinders people from participating in certain sport. We know football is a cheap sport. What you most likely, maybe running is the most cheapest, because all you need is yourself and your run. That's it. Football, you need boots, you need shin guards. If you're kicking about the ball on the street, you don't need much. You just need a ball. We grew up playing with the boys. You see a lot of boys in the townships. They just put together plastic bags, and then that's a football. You run. You play with that. So if you don't have access to equipment, it becomes difficult as well. If you don't have the boots, the shin guards, the equipment, to train, it becomes also very difficult for you to enter. Because you want to be like everybody else, and if you don't look like everybody else, it becomes kind of discouraging. It also it boosts your morale when you've got those kind of things to get involved more. We know that sport, it doesn't happen in one place. This week you're playing here, next week you're playing there, and the training sessions, because of people work during the day, people are at school during the day, you have to travel to a certain place for coaching. Access to quality coaching is also a problem. And then transport to get there, you need to spend money to get where you're going. It becomes really difficult if you are living in Alex and you need to train in Midrand. A lot of the families where our players, the families where they come from, it's luxury. Those kind of things are luxuries to have. The money that they have are meant for the family. To feed the family. Some of them depend on the government grant that they get. So, things like, getting on a transport to go train, to go to a game, those kind of things, it's really luxury. So those kind of things, can actually, discourage someone from getting involved. I'm not even talking about the likes of golf, because we know the golf clubs, the equipment required, I think that is why you will see some of the sport, you won't see a lot of people of color participating, because we just cannot afford, to get involved. Rowing, you see rowing, you see squash, you see, golf as well, but slowly but surely, you'll see some of the people that, get support from maybe a university, a school, some kind of structure, assisting them to participate. Then we're not saying we don't have talent. We do have the talent in as far as Black people and the people of color are concerned, but it's because we cannot afford to get involved in some of those sports. That is what hinders us from really getting paid. And obviously you're saying the prosperity of between men and women, there's a lot. I think for me, the two things that play a huge role in that space, it's exposure in the media space. The media is so focused on men's sport so much that they forget about the women. And then exposure, it's PR value. It's linked to getting a sponsor. If a sponsor doesn't see if they don't see, a women's sport on television much or hear about it on radio, in print, on social media, they're thinking, where are we going to get our return of investment? Where are we going to get our PR value if we get involved with women's football or with netball or whatever? So if the media can also give women's sport more exposure, then we can get more people coming on board to sponsor the women's sport. And these kind of things, commercialization of women's sport is really linked to people coming on board as sponsors to put money on the table. Because that's the money we use not only for logistics. Then if you've got extra, then you can start putting, increasing the stipends, increasing what you're paying the women at the end of the day. But if you don't have the money that you're getting from a certain sponsor, can't even cover all the logistics. You need to also dig deep in your pocket to also, put to augment what you're receiving. Then it's already a problem. You can't even afford salaries. So men's sport will always be ahead because we do not get the exposure that we are requiring at the moment. Although conversations are happening, but implementation is taking longer than expected, and the sponsors are just not coming on board as far as women's sport. Some sport I like here than others. Netball has got great sponsors, but some other sports, women's sport are still struggling with sponsorship.
Thank you, Lydia, for those views. Mr. Kagai saying that the money, federations use money as a barrier, where kids are required to pay in order to travel with provincial teams. Mashangu saying in the chat there that we need to invest more in sport as a country. Facilities are vandalized in our communities. And Almin Klitter saying that media definitely is a huge barrier. And I want to focus on that, Yulisa, in my question. But guys, I can't be the only guy asking the questions here. So I want to ask the attendees to please pose their questions at the panelists and Dr. Tai. So we can start a conversation here. But Yulisa, let me ask you about the media. So you will know that there was a gymnast, right, at the Olympic Games who decided due to her mental health to withdraw from, and I love your background, by the way. That's the Madiba's logos in the background there. Very similar to the UWC colors. But I want to ask you, Simone Biles, who's part of the Great Britain gymnastics team, withdrew from her event because of mental health illness. There was a similar incident where a black tennis player withdrew, I think, from the of the French Open. I'm not a big follower of tennis, but the same columnist, Mr. Piers Morgan, who writes for newspapers in the UK, started attacking especially black women, and it seems to be a feature in the media that whenever black women come under scrutiny all the time, whether it's Simone Biles, we've seen what happened to Caster Semenya, for example, where white male administrators of athletics, world athletics, have ruled on her gender. People tell Serena Williams what to wear at tennis tournaments. So can your view on the media's role in bolstering patriarchy, against women?
Thank you and good morning. Oh, Lord, it's been a long good evening to everyone. If I can start by saying—
It is morning for Dr. Tai, so it's okay.
Thank you, Dr. Tai. I mean, if I can start by saying whoever pays attention to the sensationalist Piers Morgan has a problem. Let's start there. We can't possibly call him a journalist. He's a gossip columnist. That is exactly what he is. But I think in terms of why there's such a negative slant to reporting on female athletes, but in particular Black female athletes, it has to be something that we have to particularly, I think, go back to in our history. Because we're not expected to be able to perform, we're not expected to be excellent, we're not expected to be number one in the world. I think there is still certainly a very large part of society that cannot believe or will not allow for Black females in particular, but Black people in general, to be the best that they can be. I think it's important that the two players, it's Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles, both from America. But as well as we had issues with some of the Namibian runners, we've had issues with some of the Kenyan runners. So it was also just an interesting Olympics, I think, for a lot of us watching the commentary going around, where it did seem that it was the Olympics of anti-Black women. And I think that's something from the IOC perspectives that it has to be looked at. It is a little bit scary on the one hand, because then how do we and where do we then have the good examples of behavior and performance and the importance of sport to be able to show to up and coming young athletes if we're sitting almost at war with the structures?
Nomsa, I didn't want to ask you, Liz, for this question, but she's created a very nice segue into the next question. And I wanted to ask, do you think sometimes our administrative bodies, our sports governing bodies in South Africa allow themselves to be bullied by global bodies? So let's talk about SASCOC. Did they do enough in the case of Caster Semenya? Did they give her enough support? I'm asking Nomsa because I know your Liz was involved at SASCOC, so I don't want to put her on the spot, but maybe let's have a view from and I'm not picking on SASCOC. It could be any organization. It could be Cricket South Africa at the moment. It's very quiet about the racism allegations made against former white players during the 90s, you know, by Black players.
Wow, I think my view would be a lot of African bodies, I don't want to say South African per se, a lot of African bodies allow themselves to be dictated to by global structures like your FIFA, your FINA, your FIBA. And for me, the reason for that, it is largely because as most African bodies, we rely on these international organizations for funding. And until such time that as Africans, we are able to invest in ourselves and will be able to look people in the eye and say, go elsewhere, not here. But because, remember, we're standing cap in hand, waiting for some sort of funding for us to get involved. And I think as a country, we didn't fight enough for Caster. It's my own view. I'm not saying SASCOC per se as a structure, but I'm saying all of us, including myself as an individual, what is it that I did to show signing a petition is not enough? What is it that we did as individual South Africans to ensure that we help her fight this? And now the study has come out. What is it that we're going to do to ensure that we make the necessary noise so that those old men sitting around tables making decisions get to realize that what they are doing is wrong?
Thank you, Nomsa. That's really well answered. I want to go back. Mr. G has asked a question. Thank you for helping me here. I've got COVID brain fog. So it's very important that we make it a conversation. But Mr. Gagai makes a very excellent point that all of the women on this panel are at the forefront of major sports bodies in South Africa. People featured on the documentary, like Willem Groenewald, sits on the board of SARU, the South African Rugby Union. And he asks, and I want to get in a sense, and maybe if I can pick on Lydia, because I'm round robining this conversation, if I can use that bastardized term. But just to ask you, how important is it for student athletes, for young athletes, for established athletes to see women in positions, influential positions in sports federations? How important is it to have women coaches coaching women as well?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Very important, very, very. I can't even, say it enough. It's really, really important that the younger generation, get to see more women in leadership roles. Whether in coaching, whether in sports science, whether in the SARU board, etc. Because it also normalizes women being in leadership positions. Because normally, the kids, when they grow up, they look up and they see all these men on boards, this picture full of men, and they think it's normal. And then, what does that say to the young girls that are growing up? They don't think they belong. They don't think they belong there. And then they grow up, feeling inferior because, and not confident enough because they don't think that they can get there. But if we see, if they see more women, in decision-making positions, more on television, coaching girls, coaching teams, whether it's a netball or football or any other sport, then it encourages them to be whatever they want, whatever they want to be. Gone are the days where we used to think that engineering is for only men, coaching is only for men. We used to have rarely any women who were coaches back then, But slowly but surely, we're still talking about sport that are male dominated in this day and age. It's because the wheels of change are taking too long to turn. But, we need more women in leadership positions, no matter where, so that the younger generation can normalize this and see it as a normal thing. And they can also aspire, to get there. And, we automatically, those women in leadership positions become their role models, people to look up to. Then we can mentor them to get into those positions in the future. Then we won't have pictures or boardrooms full of men and only 2 or 3 women, if not one. I think we've seen studies where that show that organizations that are the most effective are the ones that have more women in leadership positions. Those that didn't have any women whatsoever, they struggled. Especially when it comes to sales, revenue generation and stuff. But diversity is key. Diversity is key in any organization. We need some sort of gender balance in decision making, because diversity brings in new ideas, fresh ideas, different perspectives. But like I said, we need to normalize, seeing more women in leadership positions, because this is what the little girl who's coming behind me needs to see, so that they can also aspire to be there.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Lydia, for that very considered answer. And I just want to piggyback on what Dr. Tai is saying before I'm going to ask him a bit of a humdinger of a question. So you need to prepare yourself mentally for what I'm going to ask you next. But he mentions that Professor Marion Keim contributed to the documentary, and she's doing some great groundbreaking work, studying with offering a postgrad programs in sports development in communities, and doing very, very important work. And I just wanted to correct a statement I made earlier on. I said Elam Groenewald was still on the SARU board. She isn't any longer, and that's a great pity, because you can see that with diversity we create strength. When we saw a diverse Proteas team, male team, they were winning everything in cricket. They were the ICC Test champions, and they were top-ranked sides for T20 and ODIs. But I want to ask Dr. Tai a personal question, if I'm allowed to. So I want to know which Premier Soccer League team you support before I ask you the next question, Dr. Tai.
You'll never walk alone.
Okay, so you're a Liverpool fan. Okay, that's cool. So maybe I want to ask you as a man, right? As a fellow man, I got quite excited as a Manchester United fan when Manchester United signed Cristiano Ronaldo again, until somebody tempered my enthusiasm by pointing out that there's still rape allegations hanging over the head of this player, right? So women then have to come on and bear the burden of explaining why it isn't cool to chant Cristiano Ronaldo's name and have his number and name on the back of your shirt, because the male football fans are just oblivious to it. And so, unfortunately, the biggest football club in the world is also oblivious to this message we're sending out to young men and young women. Is that a problem as well? I know footballers don't ask to be role models, but at the same time, they take all kinds of endorsements. They expect young people to buy the boots that they're wearing and the shirts that they're wearing. So what is the responsibility of male, of men in terms of bearing, of shouldering the burden? And it's like asking Black people to explain why something is racist. You know, why must the burden lie on Black people to explain racism to white people, you know? So I want to put you on the spot there, Dr. Tai, because your documentary also talks about that gender-based violence, you know, the last part of your documentary. And I was very struck by the strong partners that Tamsin and Tamlin both have. They don't feel threatened that their partners, their women partners, could be more successful than them, you know? And the way they support their partners is very encouraging, you know? When we hear about these horror stories from the Cape Flats, Mitchell's Plain, it's very nice to see that family dynamic with the Thomas family as well, where mom and dad are a unit, you know? But there's a lot of broken homes on the Cape Flats. This is one of those homes where you can feel, when you watch this documentary, you can feel the warmth, you know, you can feel the love in the family. And you can see a dad and a mom who will do anything to help their daughter succeed. So let me ask you about the Cristiano Ronaldo example.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you for setting that question up. So a couple of things come to mind. One, I do want to acknowledge and say explicitly, you know, and acknowledge Alroy Gallant. And I mentioned Andre B. earlier, and I put Alroy's name in the chat. Alroy is a partner to Tamsin. And you know, I think there's a lot. You raised such an important point when we think about the Cristiano Ronaldo context that you mentioned. And as soon as you said it, the first thing I wrote down is, you know, performance is often privileged over character. As my grandmother would say, character, right? You know, you know, we get caught up in the worship that we don't, like in faith spaces, we don't always hold people accountable. And sport, let's be clear, the sports space is a worship space. I've been to soccer games, you know, in England, football games in England, different places. You know, I mean, you lift hands, you know, the music is playing, you know, the songs are sung, the hymns, you know, you have your quote unquote pastors on the field. But just like in other contexts where you have these leaders who have responsibility and privilege, there's also at times a turn of a blind eye to the weaknesses and understanding of character that I believe is problematic. So I think a couple of things that come to mind. One, when we recognize the power of sport as an educational space, as a legitimate educational discipline, I think that it would help us to take more seriously the influence that athletes, that administrators that we have. And I think a lot of times, you know, we sort of toy with it, but we don't always, I think, lean into it in ways that allow us to really leverage the influence that athletes have. And so as a result, people also get a chance to get away with things that they shouldn't. So, I mean, what would it look like? And unfortunately, it would probably have to take, sadly, you know, women raising the point that you just made, when it really should be men who are saying, hey, you know, together, like this is problematic, right? And so I think, again, the other part that comes to my mind is we have to maybe reframe and expand our thoughts on violence as well. Of course, when we talk about gender-based violence in South Africa, a lot of times we're talking about physical violence. But what about what we call in my work, and it's not my term, but I've written about it, the epistemic violence, right? The psychological violence. When we talk about epistemic violence, we're talking about epistemology, the violence on our ways of knowing, right? So when you've been in an oppressive environment for so long, after a while, you no longer have to have somebody to tell you where to go. You begin to filter what you see through a broken lens. And so there's an impact that patriarchy has had on all of our lenses, and unfortunately, it impacts our sensibility to it. So we celebrate the return of a quote unquote soccer god without also thinking about the implications of what it means for him to be given that opportunity without perhaps accountability to accusation. I won't get into the case stuff because I don't know the details. I don't know, again, whether he was proven guilty or not, et cetera. But I think your point is well stated, right? That for many, it's not even on the radar. It's not even a thought. And I believe that's a reflection of epistemic violence that's not dissimilar from what you all described as relates to how some international organizations, for example, sort of have pushed countries around, especially Black spaces around and Black people around. And I believe that, again, is connected to epistemic violence. In that context, frankly, the violence of white supremacy, the violence of colonialism and its legacy that suggests that the power is in the hands of certain spaces and governments and boards and bodies. And yet some of these other spaces, well, you also just be, grateful to be able to participate. So I think those are the things that come to mind. One, I think we have to reimagine, accountability. I think we also need to reimagine the impact and really embrace the power of sport as a legitimate academic space, as a legitimate space of scholarship. That's one of the things I'm highlighting in my work here at my university, is that athletes are scholars. And so I think we need to also have the same level of respect for them, but also the same level of accountability, because what they do impacts what our young people do and what culture does. And so for those reasons, I think that what you raised is vital. And I'm excited to, in this conversation that you've taken it that direction.
I've actually written a column about it, which I'll share with you, Dr. Tai. And it was very controversial because men just couldn't understand what I was talking about. It wasn't even part of their consciousness, So I want to give our very illustrious panel a chance to plot the way forward for us. If Nomsa Mahlangu, Yoliswa Lumka, and Lydia Muniepao were in charge of sports in South Africa, and they had one silver bullet each to make sea changes in the landscape of South African sport, but in particular Black women, advancing the cause of Black women, what would they do? Let's start with my Orlando Pirates teammate there. Nomsa, what would you do with your silver bullet to advance women's sport in South Africa, Black women in particular?
Wow, I would need a bullets. One is not enough.
Just run with it, Okay, I'm giving you 6 shots, go for it.
I think for me, the most important thing is to give women equal opportunities as men. And that would mean I would pay them the same. I would ensure they have everything that the man has. So what we do for boys, we would equally do for girls. But most importantly is to also educate and empower women to understand that they have a responsibility towards other women. So it means it's my responsibility to lift other women up. And again, this notion of the first, it must come to an end. Yes, you were the first. How many more hundreds did you bring? For me, those are my parting shot.
Fantastic, and point well made. Yoliswa, you're looking to the heavens there for some inspiration. Are you going to spend your silver bullet?
Because my life has been spent largely on the scientific side, I would go with, we have to reset our sport development continuum as a country. One, because the focus on sport development is not necessarily on women, it is on boys and men. But in any event, our development continuum is a mess and disjointed. So I would put that's the biggest thing that we can do to change sport for women in particular, but sport overall in the country.
Again, an excellent point. These are, ladies and gentlemen, women at the forefront of our national sporting bodies and at our universities. And we need to help them and empower them to make a difference. Lydia,
can I just ask
see your hand, Dr. Tai, an old-fashioned hand there.
Can I just ask a follow-up question
to
Ms. Lomka? I just want, she mentioned to reset the sport development continuum. Can you maybe just say maybe a sentence or two more about what that may look like specifically? I sense that there's a vision behind what you're saying. I would love to maybe if you could flesh that out a bit more for the audience.
Sure. But what's scary for me on the one hand, but also sad, is that as a country, we have a white paper. And from the white paper, the Sport Act was developed. If I can say, we have a Sport Act, but actually nobody's enacting the Sport Act. So we are in the process now of reviewing a plan that we developed in 2012, which nobody has actually ever looked at or operationalized. So, and the plan is very clear about the responsibilities of the different entities in the country. So the governmental structure and the non-governmental structures in terms of schools, national federations, as well as the INSASCOC, and obviously institutions of higher learning. But the system is not actually working in a seamless format as it should. It's sort of like this, things hang over and things are broken over certain things. For example, now our school sport, the development is not aligned actually to what, from a sporting perspective, the coaching is supposed to do leading up from primary school to high school to university to province to national. So when I mean then our sport development continuum is broken, that's pretty much it. We have a highway, but it's got sections that have fallen off.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for the explanation. Thanks, Dr. Tai. I like the way you used them, Dr. Tai. Lydia, your parting shot. How would you, if you were given the opportunity, how would you advance women in sport in South Africa?
Yeah, I agreed a lot with what Nomsa was saying. Giving leveling the playing fields for both men and women. Whether it be funding, whether it be access, and etc. But if I had to add to that, I would say we take it all the way down, to grassroots level, where we start with equal access to opportunities, equal access to facilities. We not only encourage, but we encourage participation to increase the numbers. Getting the parents enticed. Once you get the parents in there, especially Black parents, because you go to football matches, you see who's around, to cheer on the kids. It's mostly the parents, the white parents. The Black parents, normally there are only a few. But sometimes we do understand those challenges because they have to work, they don't own their own businesses and stuff. But I think from a parental perspective, if we support our kids more, at that level, it will really help. And we give the girls the same development support that we give the boys. As I look in football, you've got all these Danone Cups, under 11 competitions. The academy studies as small as under 6, under 5. But when you look at the girls, there's nobody there. The girls, you start seeing a girl playing football at 13 years old. That's too late. What happened when from the time they were 4 until they were 13? We don't know what happens. I think that what Dioliso is saying is quite important. When you incorporate school sport into this whole structure and ensure that everything is working there and all the girls and the boys are given equal opportunity, that would be something that would really work. Educate. Education is quite key for us. Am I still there? Oh yeah. Education is quite key for me. The girls need to empower themselves. They need to educate themselves. As federations, we need to educate all the support systems, referees, coaches, everybody. We need to educate them so that they can be on the same level as the men. And then that's how we can, get top quality performances out of our women. And we can eventually get into commercializing the sport so that the women can also make money out of their own talents. They don't have to work, then play football on the side and, or play football on the side, something like that. They can actually make money out of playing football or playing netball or whatever.
Absolutely. And our women footballers have to play abroad in order to earn a living, to join those big European giant clubs. And we need to normalize that salary equality, in sport between men and women. But I also think one of the other things that we need to normalize are women journalists who are making their marks in a different kind of way, but telling the stories of women. They also face a lot of patriarchy in the organizations they work for. So I want to single out two of them that I think are two of the top broadcasters. And unfortunately, it's a fantastic platform, G Sports for Women, run by Casnado, who is a commentator. She's one of the best cricket commentators in this country. I mean, I'm waiting for SuperSport to snap her up. It hasn't happened. Sky News sees her value. She was part of the tournament, 100 tournament in the UK, where she was part of the commentary team, Then we look at Julia Stewart, who also grew up in Mitchell's Plain, by the way, Dr. Tai. She's the South African and African correspondent for the English Premier League. And she's one of the most knowledgeable football pundits in South Africa, if not the continent. And then Katua Lowe is a radio broadcaster and focuses in particular on rugby. They are recognized as women in sport. But I am pretty sure if we put them up against male broadcasters and journalists, they can hold their own and actually beat the men at their game. And on that note, I want to introduce a gentleman who is one of my favorite people at the university, mostly because he gives me swag. I'm getting him into trouble now, but he gets me UWC swag to wear, because I'm a bit of a brand ambassador for the university. So I know this issue is very close to his heart, Mr. Mandla Kagai. Mr. Kagai has also taken the opportunity in the tertiary institution space to further his own education. I think there was a master's recently, Mr. Kagai, that you completed at UWC. Congratulations, belated. But also, you'll see on the documentary that he walks around with a walking stick. And I can tell you that that's a temporary measure because he is my teammate with the UWC staff football team. And I look forward to playing with him, not against him. So delivering our vote of thanks for this evening's conversation, I want to invite Mr. Kagai to take the floor.
Thank you, Hassan. Good morning, Tai. Always good to see you. Good afternoon or evening, colleagues in South Africa. And I must first thank the three ladies who accepted my invite within a short space of time. And I knew that I could always count on you, colleagues, because I know how passionate you are and you know how passionate I am about women in sport. But colleagues, as I make this thank you, I need to keep on challenging us as men. To me, my heart bleeds every time when we sit in these platforms and listen to men or women share their stories. And you find that women are sharing those sad stories because of us as men. All the suffering that they have experienced, it did not fall from heaven. It is inflicted by us men. So for things to change, whether it's in sport or in society, we need to be responsible as men. Like Ty has said, we cannot forget that we are born from a woman. We have wives, we have girlfriends, others, we have sisters, we have daughters. I am sure all these things that are going wrong in our society, we would not like these people that I have mentioned to experience. So the challenge is on us as men to wake up and start calling one another off. We cannot sit comfortably in boardrooms where you have a boys club, 10 men, 1 woman, and when that woman is asking questions, we start ganging up against her and push her out of the system, because that is what we do as men. So we need to take responsibility. I also applaud few men that have been able to stand up and take initiative, because not all men are bad men, but it must be us, few good men, to make sure that we push the fight and change the system. So Ty, thank you very much for the initiative. I know we met in 2017, your passion rubbed off me, and since then I have become a different person. And at UWC, I have put many things in place to ensure that we treat women as equal, whether it's our colleagues or whether it is student athletes. I will never have a club at UWC if that club is only a men's club. If I have a football club, there must be a men and women club. We cannot have a rugby club that only is a men's club, because that is where this whole thing starts. We start eliminating people by forming those clubs where we know that culturally women are not allowed to play. So thank you very much for that. Hassan, thank you very much for always being on our corner. I know you and me and school, I see you are online as well. We are few men that are not shy to stand up and speak about these things. But let us light the torch for others to follow us. Sis Nomsa, Sis Lydia, and Sis Yoliswa, please keep challenging us, because we work in same spaces. Keep challenging us, keep asking us those uncomfortable questions so that we can learn and also unlearn certain things that we have developed, or certain habits that we have developed over time. I must also thank everyone that has attended. I see we have 36 live here, and also we have 40 on Facebook Live. Thank you very much to everyone that has showed interest in supporting this cause. It is not a UWC cause. It is a societal cause, and each and every one of us has a role to play. When we live here, Dr. Tai, whenever we speak, he always uses one line that he does not believe in drive-bys. This must not be one of those drive-bys where we forget about it tomorrow. We must go and practice what we have learned from here, and also unlearn certain things that we have been doing because of the influence that we have received here. When we meet next time, whether it is on another platform outside of UWC, we must always remind ourselves of all these conversations that we have had, and also keep checking on whether we have made any progress. If not, we must also hold ourselves accountable as to why we have not made any progress. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. On behalf of UWC, I will always appreciate your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gagai, Mr. G, as we call him. You know, Mr. Gagai's words reminded me that about a very sad commemoration at UWC on Monday, when it marked the 2nd year of the murder of one of our students, Jessie S. She would have been in her final year this year. And this murder happened during a very unfortunate spate of murders of young women students. Uyuneni, you'll know from UCT. The families actually speak to each other. I speak to Jessie's mom regularly as a university. We keep tabs on the case. We're with them in their fight for justice. Her grandfather also passed away very tragically in that incident. And I think what we need to take out of this, Mr. G asks us, let this not be the end of the conversation. But can men actually and Dr. Tai asked us in the beginning, can we look at ourselves in the mirror? Can the conversation start with a man in the mirror? You know, how can we take the burden of our sisters, you know, by not being patriarchal or patronizing, but empowering them, you know, to make the playing fields equal. And on that note, I want to thank each and every person who is part of this conversation, has been part of this conversation. My daughter's just come from class. You know, we must encourage our young girls to sport. And we need to hold each other accountable as men. You know, it's not, we can't have situations where we've got teenage sons watching beach volleyball but objectifying the women playing the beach volleyball. We need to be the role models in society as well. And on that note, happy Wednesday, everybody, and thank you so much. I want to ask my media colleagues, my team, to please send out the documentary to the UWC campus community on all our platforms, a link to the documentary. If you're okay with that, Dr. Tai, we'd also like to share it on all of our platforms. It is officially launched, I'm guessing now, eh? So we'd like to share it on all of our platforms as well, so that other men can engage with it, because we are the protagonists for a lot of the problems that women have to deal with, you know, and then have to bear the burden. But thank you very much, colleagues. It was a real privilege to be able to host such a powwow panel, and hope to see everybody soon. Please keep safe. These are not normal times we're living through. It's extraordinary times. This is our World War III. You know, so we need to be kind. We need to encourage each other all the time. We need to call our brothers and sisters and ask them, are you okay? Be kind. And until next time, from me, the Media, Marketing and Communications Manager for UWC, I bid you a good evening, and please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Jesse, you may end the session. Thank you.